Hello, friends. My name is Charmaine, and I am your host here at To Which Isle. Thank you for joining me today. Enjoying myself a glass of wine as we review a book. That's what I said. We're going to review a book. My cat wanted to join just for a bit today, although she doesn't want to be on camera. All right. Hello. Hello. She says, take me off camera. I don't like it. All right. The book that I'm going to review today is The Body Keeps a Score: Brain, Mind, and Body in the Healing of Trauma. This is a book by Bessel Kolk, MD. I read this on the suggestion of my therapist because she recommended as part of trauma work if you were really interested in it. And I was, because I'm always interested in how the brain processes things, because I always felt a little bit out of place. Like I always felt like my brain didn't process the way most people did. So let's get to the book. One of the first things that stood out to me in this book is a section on inescapable shock and the ability to learn helplessness because you are unable to escape a situation that is really bad for you. And that you can really essentially learn to be stuck when you are not actually stuck in real life. And there's a awful experiment done on dogs with cages involving electrical shocks and locked doors, and it broke my heart, but it really did show that these dogs, even when the cages were opened, the ones that had been repeatedly shocked before, would just cower down and whimper or bark and growl, but they would never try to escape, even though the door may have been opened. It was such a powerful thing to read about for me because it really goes to show what trauma does to somebody. If it's a trauma that happens to a very young person who is unable to escape the situation because being a young person, you need cared for. You end up in this place where you learn your helplessness. Oh my goodness, your helplessness. Oh my gosh. Okay, forget it. I'm not going to say that word. Learning to be helpless. There we go. And then what I read about, I mean, it was just like I would find out these things and go, yes, that makes so much sense. So the next thing that really stood out to me was a section on traumatic reenactments and the compulsion to reenact those traumatic events, even though you may not be aware that you have a compulsion to reenact a certain traumatic event. The fact that there is a compulsion to repeat, it said so much for me and my trauma recovery to know that it was normal to find yourself compulsionarily going after things on repeat and no ability to stop yourself from doing it. I just found it very fascinating. So it's another really good aspect they talk about in this book. Now, I want to read a powerful paragraph that I had read while I was reading this book, and I'm going to read it to you now. Even years later, traumatized people often have enormous difficulty telling other people what has happened to them. Their bodies re-experience terror, rage, and helplessness, as well as the impulse to fight or flee. But these feelings are almost impossible to articulate. Trauma by nature drives us to the edge of comprehension, cutting us off from language based on common experiences or imaginable past. Now, that paragraph says to me that traumatized people, even just talking about what had happened to them, will start to feel the effects of that trauma taking over all over again, that their bodies react without them really knowing that their bodies are reacting at that moment. And and that traumas can't be articulated. Something was said to me once when yeah, and actually it was kind of not even that long ago that it was said to me that it really struck a chord with me and hit me in a spot that I went, "Wait, wait, wait, wait. This isn't right." And it was in regards to my own trauma and that I should have said something about more of what had happened if something so bad happened to me so many times. I should have been able to say how many times and exactly what had happened. And now I realize that that was debilitating to me because that was I couldn't articulate. I still, to this day, cannot articulate everything from my childhood trauma. And still to this day, little bits come back sometimes in the middle of the night, in a night terror, sometimes in day terrors too, where I'll start to think about something and all of a sudden it will roll me into this place where I feel almost again like I am having the trauma happen to me again. Except now I have skills to take me out of that. But before I didn't. And I remember trying to tell people what was going on with me, but not really having words to articulate it. And this saying that there aren't words to articulate it for people who have been traumatized. Now I understand why I could not articulate. And it makes me sad that some people don't understand that about trauma, but not everybody is going to understand everything about everything. So you just got to let people be where they are. Also, another little fact brought out in the book that I had written down, being traumatized means continuing to organize your life as if the trauma were still going on, unchanged and immutable, as every new encounter or event is contaminated by the past. And think about that because you organize your life based on this trauma that happened to you. And you may not even know that you're organizing your life that way. Every encounter you have and every event that happens is tainted by the past. It's got shadowing by past events to it. You will never experience the current moment as what it is. Oh, I'm just picking out little bits that I had read that I wrote down that I thought were important and that I'm sharing. If you have interest in this book, please, by all means, go to Amazon, pick it up. I'm pretty sure it is on an Audible, Kindle, and I bought paper because I like to flip pages. I'm old school, and screens I just can't read. My eyes are getting bad. Guess that comes with age. So another thing that I had picked out that stood out to me was the attempts to maintain control over unbearable physiological reactions can result in a whole range of physical symptoms, including fibromyalgia, chronic fatigue, and other autoimmune diseases. So, in order to treat a human being for trauma, you have to treat them, every organism, actually, because it doesn't matter if you're a human, you're a dog, you're a horse, you're a whale, you're an animal, and the entire organism, body, mind, and brain need to be treated for trauma. This statement says that the more that you try to control these things, the more the illness will present in your body. The more likely that these illnesses, fibromyalgia, chronic fatigue, and other autoimmune disorders will happen to you. They'll happen to you because you're trying to control something that you really need to be letting out. And that's how most of it us get stuck in trauma. That's a lot of us veterans with PTSD, like myself, get stuck in trauma that way because we don't really realize that these two things are connected so intimately that our bodies will react if we are stuffing our emotions. It's crazy to think, but that is exactly what is happening. And I think that was the one of the biggest things in this book that I read that I was like, "Oh my gosh, this makes so much sense to me now." This makes sense why I've struggled with migraines, why I struggle with fatigue, why I struggle with IBS. Your gut is connected to your brain. When you feel anxiety, you usually feel it somewhere in your stomach, in your gut, and something doesn't feel right. That's why those diseases end up taking hold because you're not feeling those emotions, you're stuffing them, you're holding them within your body. And when you hold them within your body, something that is, when you hold something within your body that is supposed to be let out and processed, then it gets stuck there and it presents in these diseases that sometimes nobody can find reasons for. I've gone to the VA doctors and had them tell me they have no idea why I have migraines the way I do. Having the severe migraines that I have had with no actual cause for them is part of me holding in emotions from my trauma that I'm unwilling to let out because they're scary and I don't enjoy them and I don't want to feel like I'm reliving the trauma. But one of the fixes that we'll get to is just that, making that trauma less powerful, making yourself have more power than that event. Now, there's a whole bunch of stuff on attachment in here as well. And I know I've had a podcast on attachment, but this goes to attest to the attachment of kids that have been traumatized, children that become traumatized by whatever is going on in their family. So children become attached to whoever functions as their primary caregiver. But the nature of that attachment, whether secure or insecure, makes a huge difference over the course of a child's life. If your attachment to your primary caregiver is an insecure attachment, then that is going to affect you your whole life until you address it and then make sense of it yourself. Another key aspect to being a child and having secure attachments with your parents, learning how to manage arousal is a key life skill, and parents must do it for babies before babies can do it for themselves. When you take care of babies, you give them a bottle when they're hungry. When they get wet and soiled, you change them. When they get uncomfortable and gassy, you burp them. When they cry, you hold them and you cuddle them and make them feel secure. All of these are secure attachments. But as you get older, if something happens that fear starts to grow in this child and they do not trust their primary caregiver for that secure attachment anymore, then they're probably not going to learn the proper arousal management as that key life skill. Instead, they're going to let that arousal get them every time, and they become very emotionally charged people. Emotionally charged people that may not have actual emotional intelligence to go with the emotions that they're charged with. And that can be a very dangerous thing. Uh, at least toxic to other people, to say the least. And to be honest, we're all a little toxic. So it's all about learning about yourself and really being honest with yourself about where you are and maybe being honest about that attachment that you had as a kid and realizing that maybe you didn't learn these life skills to manage your arousal, and that that might be something you need to do and something that you can do with mental health. Anyway, another major thing that stood out to me was just that little bit, because I don't think we think about that very much as we get into adulthood. So now I want to add here, and it says specifically in this book too, nobody can treat a war, an abuse, rape, molestation, or any other horrendous event. For that matter, what has happened cannot be undone. But what can be dealt with are the imprints of the trauma on the body, the mind, and the soul. The crushing sensations in your chest that you may have labeled as anxiety or depression, the fear of losing control, always being on alert for danger or rejection, the self-loathing, the nightmares, the flashbacks, the fog that keeps you from staying on task and from engaging fully in what you are doing, being unable to fully open your heart to another human being. Another major paragraph that's like the start of chapter 13 of this book. And it's just that nobody can undo what has happened, but you can learn to live with it and how to manage the really tough emotions that come up when life circumstances comes knocking, and that spiral event where you come and revisit the same event, or maybe something very similar to it, to see if you've gained more knowledge or not. Nothing can undo it, but you can learn a lot about yourself and learn better reactions. Learn to really control those emotions, not so much control them. Learn how to flow with them and feel them as they need to be felt, instead of being afraid every time one of them pops their little heads up. For me, it's anger. When anger pops its little head up, I get all a fluster. I don't know how to handle it. I have a really hard time with it. But to be honest, I'm really just learning to not disrespect myself as much. And that right there is a beautiful, beautiful thing, to know that I'm going the right way, as I drink from the skull of my enemies. I'm just kidding. Take a sip of wine here if you're drinking wine as we review this book. I was feeling a little parched. All right. So let's see. Let's go. There's a whole section. There's a whole section in this book on no mind without mindfulness. You really don't have control, or you are unable to handle what is going on through your mind if you're not mindful about what it is that you're thinking. Our thoughts have great power over us. Our thoughts can become beliefs very quickly. Our emotions can almost become reality. And and just because you feel an emotion doesn't necessarily mean that something is happening. It means that there's information that needs to be discovered. It's like when you feel an emotion, you should put that scientist hat on and go, okay, hey, what's creating this reaction? Let's look into it. What do we add? You know, that's kind of how we need to look at things. And hold on, it just got really bright in here. And holy, the sun is setting, my friends. All right. That ought to help. Woo! So when the sun sets in Georgia, we have to pay attention. All right. So no mind without mindfulness. And here's the very beginning of that little no mind without mindfulness. At the core of recovery is self-awareness. The most important phrases in trauma therapy are notice that and what happens next. It was one of the biggest things I had to learn was how to notice, number one, because I was so out of touch with my body. But once I started noticing, I was noticing far too late, and it was very, very irritating. I can't tell you how irritating that part of my recovery was because I could not seem to nail down the exact moment that I started feeling something. I was always like a day into it before I went, oh shit, I'm really angry about something. Sometimes I'd be a week into being angry. Being angry for a week does so much damage to your body. Oh my gosh. Don't hold anger in. It's not healthy for you. So, anyway, notice that. Noticing that. Notice when it happens. If you're not there yet, notice. Just start to notice. So once your awareness and you is opened and you start to notice things, you can start rewinding it further and further back so that you can really unwind the thoughts that are taking you places, the thoughts that are taking you into the dark spots, because we have control over that. We just have to think a different way. But it takes conscious effort of noticing these things and then doing something about it. What happens next? Okay, so notice that. I noticed that I feel angry. What happens next? I start to get angrier and angrier, and I'll go a whole week beating myself up, not taking care of myself because I don't deserve that, not feeding myself because I don't have time to make myself food. And why do I deserve that anyway? That's how mean I was to myself. I'm not anymore, thank goodness, but I see how far I came, and undoing it started with mindfulness because I had to be able to stop and notice what was going on with me and know what was coming next. And going, you know what, here's where I can make a new choice. And now I'm going to let this go. Yes, I feel angry, rightfully so that I feel angry, but I am letting it go now because it will not ruin my day for me. I want a nice day, so I'm going to have a nice day, even though I got angry. Part of trauma and trauma work is really integrating traumatic memories. People cannot put traumatic events behind them until they are able to acknowledge what has happened and start to recognize the invisible demons they're struggling with. Because they are invisible at that point. Yes, it's something that happened. Absolutely, it's something can happen again. However, what is the likelihood if you are doing the right things to protect yourself from you, if you're creating the right boundaries and you're working through the emotional issues that you have, you'll start to recognize that, you know what, every time I'm in the grocery store and I smell that particular smell, it doesn't mean that I'm actually in immediate, imminent danger. And it's actually those things that keep us hyper aware. If you're somebody who prides yourself on your awareness, your vigility, me making up words and stuff again. Okay, so you pride yourself in being the person that is the noticer, the person that notices when things are out of place. In the military, that's a big skill. We are supposed to pay attention to things because there could be a bomb underneath any truck, and it is kind of our job to have an awareness of what is around us at all given time to make sure that everybody is safe. At least that's kind of how it is in the military. I know coming out of the military, I go to a restaurant and I notice all of the doorways immediately, all the entrances, all the exits, where the restrooms are, where the food comes out. And I sit myself against a wall somewhere. If there's not a wall available, I sit myself in a place that makes me feel safe, which is usually kind of way out of the back, but close enough to an exit to exit quickly if need be. There were lots of stipulations on where I needed to sit in a restaurant for a really long time until I realized that that was part of my hypervigilance and it wasn't necessary anymore. All of that was unnecessary stress on my body because as I'm sitting there calculating out, how quickly I can get out of here if some shit goes down, well, I'm not actually enjoying my time with my family now at a restaurant or my friends because I am hyper focused on anything that could go wrong. Not that anything will. Now, I've been to many, many, many restaurants and not okay. You know what? There's been a couple times that I've been in a restaurant where there's some shady people in there. It's usually because I was coming home from the bar early in the morning and it was that time, when you go to the Denny's, the Ram's Horn, the Waffle House, or whatever your cheap breakfast late night food joint is. Sometimes I get in there and go, "Ooh, those people are I think they're gonna fight." But I have to say, I've been in lots and lots of restaurants, and never once have I felt like my life was threatened. Even if it was, I feel like I would have been prepared. However, every time I've gone into a restaurant thinking something bad's going to happen and nothing bad ever happened, you think I would get used to the fact that nothing bad ever happened, but no, my trauma brain was still stuck in the past, and my body continued to be in hypervigilance. And running your body at that rate, at that high energy for so long, eventually starts to break down systems. Say you get migraines, say you get IBS, say you get heart issues, say you get asthma, maybe you have a skin condition that has no answer. There's a lot of things that are tied to your mind and your body. So just keep that in mind. I mean, another fabulous point of this book, please, please read this book. So, how do we get over that trauma? Well, desensitization is the way you get over trauma. It's not easy because that means we need to revisit. um, there's a lot of stuff on medications and how to utilize them best, but there are more things with therapy that I think are more important. But one thing I want to say is that this is a life process. If you have suffered trauma in your early childhood, young adulthood, it's a life process. You may suffer it later in life, and it's still going to be a process. Processing trauma is a process. The biggest thing is breaking the silence because silence actually really does equal death. I feel that holding in anger as long as I did brought me closer and closer to diseases that were going to take my life. I am so happy that I went into therapy and got the help that I did because I feel like even though I have ailments, they are not nearly as bad as they were when I was the peak of that crumbling of my mental health. We won't call that a peak, but when I was in the valley of the crumbling of my mental health, when I was in the deep, deep hole, the crevice, and I was trying to claw my way out, not understanding that skills were the thing that was going to bring me closer to the life I actually want. So know that. Don't stay silent if something happened to you. It needs to come to the surface. It needs a voice. Okay. So I'm going to read this little statement here. This is under The Body is the Bridge, on page 239 of this book, if you're interested. Trauma stories lessen the isolation of trauma, and they provide an explanation for why people suffer the way they do. They allow doctors to make diagnoses so that they can address problems like insomnia, rage, nightmares, or numbing. Stories can also provide people with a target to blame. Blaming is a universal human trait that helps people feel good while feeling bad, or as my old teacher used to say, hate makes the world go around. But stories also obscure a more important issue, namely that trauma radically changes people and the fact that they are no longer themselves. There was one thing I wanted to tell everybody about myself from back when I was young to this point in my life now, is that back then I was going through a trauma and I wasn't me. I didn't have myself. I didn't even know who I was. I was just trying to survive. I know I was a poopy human being. I think we're all shitty human beings until we know better. And I was a shitty person. I did a lot of hate and I perpetrated a lot of hate too. And I am glad I found a place where I don't have to feel that hate because all it really was anger. I was just really, really angry and nothing to point it at. I had nothing to point it at. And to be honest, the only thing I really have to point it at right now is the trauma itself. It has nothing to do with people because all of those people were probably traumatized too and only doing the best that they could at that time. And I have that in mind always. A popular therapy used for trauma survivors is CPT, cognitive process therapy. I've had to take that a couple times in my life, and I know I was disheartened the second time I had to take it because why couldn't I just get it the first time? But there was stuff that I missed, and I just needed to I just needed it revisited. After revisiting it, I then went into DBT, which is a dialectical behavioral therapy. And that one actually solidified my CPT therapy and really helped me figure out my life, really put the focus where it needed to be. Still had trouble letting go of things, but that is really a process of learning. I had to learn to let go. I had to learn that just because I felt a way did not mean that I needed to latch on to it and cuddle it, that it usually meant that I needed to figure out why. If I could fix it, and if I couldn't, accept it and let it go and move on from just being right here within me. Now I just want to read a quote that was put in this book that I feel is pretty important as well. It's probably the last thing I'll share on the book, like from the book itself. So this is out of chapter 17, Putting the Pieces Together, Self-Leadership. And this is a quote by Rumi. This being human is a guest house. Every morning is a new arrival, a joy, a depression, a meanness, some momentary awareness comes as an unexpected visitor. Welcome and entertain them all. Treat each guest honorably. The dark thought, the shame, the malice, meet them at the door laughing and invite them in. Be grateful for whoever comes, because each has been sent as a guide from beyond, an unexpected visitor. Why can't we treat each moment of our lives, each emotion we have, each life event, no matter how altering, good or bad, why can't we treat them all as an honored guest in our home? Our home is our whole mind. It's what we think. Our home is something that we build. We build it in a house, but our home ultimately needs to be within ourselves. That love of the home, the love of self. And I think that's what this book really brought home to me, was really integrating everything about me, accepting what has happened, knowing that I can't change it, But knowing that from this point moving forward, I can make different choices. I can find the places, the crux in my decision making and make better choices than I was making before. So that eventually my choices start making me happier instead of more miserable. Because when we're thinking about misery, when we're thinking about the yucky emotions that we don't like, being angry at somebody or being disgusted or just seething with anger, even, we should be able to catch that and go, okay, why is this emotion here? Figure out if it's a disrespect thing that you can address and set a boundary. Maybe it's something within you. Maybe you are beating yourself up and you're tired of being beaten up and that your body is telling you enough is enough. Just all things to think about. Now, this book also talks about a lot of, the therapies that help, but also that the one thing that is going to release all of those trapped fight or flight responses within your body, because they're there. If you have had trauma and it was inescapable trauma from childhood, you could be in a place where you have learned your helplessness and you just need to learn some skills to get past it. And sometimes it takes unlearning things that you have learned to do, unlearning thoughts, unlearning automatic thoughts. Automatic thoughts will get you into trouble. I try to remind myself that if I am having a thought and it is one of my automatic thoughts, I need to stop it immediately and tell myself why that thought is not true. There has been so many instances in my healing where I have just kept holding on to more and more trauma because I did not know how to release any of it. I am no master at letting things go. And one of those things that this book had just said was that sharing the story is important. People having a story and not sharing their story because they're afraid nobody wants to hear it, they're afraid it isn't important, maybe they just don't want to relive it anymore. The thing is those unshared stories, our unshared truths, become very dangerous when they're trapped within our bodies. So the body does keep the score, and you can undo that damage. And I want to welcome everybody to the undoing of the damages, because this is it for me. I've undone a lot of damage, but there is still a lot there. Trauma work is some lifelong stuff, man. Why is it so hard? The book, again, it is called The Body Keeps the Score. I highly recommend this book. Like I said, you can get it on Audible. If you are struggling, please know that there are people out there that can help. The number is 988, and it is the National Crisis Hotline. It is also the National Suicide Hotline, but it is made for any crisis. If you have a death of a loved one and you don't know how to process your grief and you don't want to talk to your circle, maybe you don't have an inner circle to talk to, 988 is there to help. Peer support representatives will be on hand to help and ask you the questions that you might need to be asking yourself, but you may not know the questions to ask yourself. So please call if you are struggling. 988. As always, take what resonates with you and leave the rest behind. I do very highly recommend this book, and I hope that you go out and read it. Thanks for sitting with me today and helping me unpack some of my trauma, but also go through a really helpful tool reading has really helped me when it comes to picking up new skills, but also really just understanding the brain and the way it works and why I think the way that I do. And I really do love sharing it with all of you. Thank you for joining me today on To Which I'll. I love doing this podcast and I appreciate all who listen. Until next time, light and love, friends.